I always imagined my wedding day would be like something out of a movie. You know the type: birds singing, soft music playing, guests smiling, and everything running smoothly, as if the universe itself decided to grant you a perfect day. And for a while, it really did feel like that. My fiancée, now my wife, Emma, looked stunning in her dress. I felt like the luckiest man alive, standing at the altar with her. Everything was perfect, until it wasn't. To give you some context, our wedding wasn't in some fancy venue or overpriced ballroom. Emma and I wanted something a little more intimate, a little more us. We rented out this beautiful outdoor garden space near where we lived. It was picturesque: green lawns, a gazebo decorated with fairy lights, and just the right amount of rustic charm. We thought it was perfect. The only small drawback? The venue was literally right next to my neighbor's property. And my neighbor had a dog. Now, don't get me wrong, I love dogs. I really do. I grew up with a golden retriever, and I'll always have a soft spot for them. But my neighbor's dog, let's just say he's not exactly the friendly, calm type. His name is Bruno, a huge, overexcited German shepherd who seems to believe that the entire world is his playground. And whenever there's any sort of noise, commotion, or people he doesn't recognize, Bruno makes his presence known, loudly. The week before the wedding, I remember joking to Emma, "Watch Bruno end up being the uninvited guest at our wedding." She laughed it off, saying, "Relax, it's just one day. I'm sure your neighbor will keep him inside." I wanted to believe her, but a part of me had a bad feeling. The morning of the wedding, everything seemed fine. Bruno barked a bit as the decorators set things up, but nothing too crazy. I took it as a good sign. Maybe he was just curious. My neighbor, Mr. Johnson, even waved to me and promised, "Don't worry, we'll keep Bruno under control." And I foolishly thought that was the end of it. Guests arrived, music started playing, and for those first few hours, it was everything I'd ever hoped for. Emma walked down the aisle. I could barely keep my eyes dry, and everyone was smiling. For a brief, shining moment, I thought, this is it, the perfect day. But then, just as the officiant began the vows, a familiar, deep bark thundered through the air. It was Bruno, and this was just the beginning. At first, people laughed. I mean, what else can you do when a giant German shepherd decides to contribute to your vows with a soundtrack of nonstop barking? Emma gave me a look, that kind of "see, I told you not to worry," mixed with "if this ruins my wedding photos, I will haunt you forever." The officiant tried to keep things moving. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." Woof, woof, woof. He raised his voice, and so did Bruno. It was like some bizarre competition over who could project louder. The guests chuckled nervously. My mom leaned over to my dad and whispered, not quietly enough, "I knew they should have booked that country club." Meanwhile, my best man, Mark, leaned toward me and muttered, "Should we just invite Bruno up here? He clearly wants a role." Emma shot him a glare, so sharp it could have sliced cake. Then, as if barking wasn't enough, Bruno started scratching at the fence. It was one of those wooden ones with small gaps, and through those gaps, we could all see his paws digging furiously. You could feel the tension ripple across the guests. It was like watching a horror movie, except the villain was a very determined dog. Finally, the neighbor, Mr. Johnson, came rushing out, shouting, "Bruno, quiet, get back here." Of course, Bruno didn't listen. In fact, I swear he barked louder, like he knew he had an audience. Mr. Johnson tried bribing him with treats, but all that did was make Bruno even more excited. He started leaping against the fence, and for one horrifying second, I thought he was going to jump it. Emma leaned toward me and hissed, "If that dog ruins this wedding, I swear." But before she could finish, there was a loud crack. One of the fence boards split. Bruno had officially upgraded from noisy nuisance to impending disaster. Half the guests gasped, some laughed nervously, and well, I had the sinking realization that my wedding day was about to become memorable for all the wrong reasons. The officiant cleared his throat, trying to keep control of the situation. "Let's proceed quickly," he suggested, flipping the pages of his notes as if speeding up the vows would somehow fix the problem. But Bruno was relentless. Every time Emma or I opened our mouths to speak, he barked over us like he was determined to make sure nobody heard a single romantic word. And then, just as I was about to say "I do," Bruno gave the loudest bark of the entire day, followed by a noise that made everyone freeze. The sound of wood splintering. Bruno was through. I will never forget the collective gasp when Bruno finally burst through the fence. He didn't just squeeze through. He exploded into the yard like some four-legged wrecking ball. A piece of fence literally toppled over, and Bruno came bounding in, tail wagging furiously, barking like he had just been invited to the party of the year. The flower girl screamed. The ring bearer dropped the pillow, and the rings went flying into the grass. My best man dove after them like it was the Super Bowl. Meanwhile, Bruno charged straight down the aisle as though he had rehearsed it. "Bruno!" Mr. Johnson shouted, chasing after him. But it was too late. The dog was fully committed. He sprinted past the guests, who were half laughing and half panicking, and made a beeline for the wedding cake. Yes, the cake. Our three-tier, perfectly frosted, $600 cake that Emma had spent weeks obsessing over. "No!" Emma shrieked, grabbing the skirt of her dress and trying to run after him. But have you ever tried chasing a dog in a wedding gown? Spoiler: the dress does not come with sprinting capabilities. Bruno skidded to a stop right in front of the cake table. He sniffed it once, barked at it like it was an enemy, and then, before anyone could react, he launched up, paws on the table. Gasps, screams, laughter. The cake wobbled. My heart stopped. And then, in slow motion, I watched Bruno sink his teeth into the bottom layer. Frosting went flying. A chunk of cake hit my cousin in the face. The whole table shuddered as Bruno happily ripped into his prize. Tail wagging like this was the best day of his life. Emma's face turned the color of the strawberries that had been delicately placed on the top tier. Her jaw dropped open, and she whispered, "I can't believe this is happening." Meanwhile, Mr. Johnson finally reached Bruno and tried pulling him away, but Bruno thought it was a game. He growled playfully and took off again, this time with an entire piece of cake in his mouth. He tore through the crowd, guests scattering like bowling pins. Frosting smeared across the grass, across my aunt's dress, across the flower girl's hair. The photographer, bless him, just kept snapping photos, because apparently chaos sells. And then, as if Bruno hadn't caused enough chaos, he spotted the bouquet. The one Emma had been carefully holding onto for the toss later. Before anyone could stop him, Bruno lunged. Emma screamed. The bouquet went flying through the air. And Bruno caught it, in his mouth. And the guests? They applauded. The moment Bruno pranced around with Emma's bouquet in his mouth, the whole wedding officially crossed from elegant ceremony into slapstick comedy. Guests were laughing, clapping, and cheering like they were watching some live reality TV show instead of our big day. Emma, on the other hand, was not amused. Her bouquet was now shredded between slobbery dog teeth, and her dream of a perfect wedding was dissolving faster than the frosting melting on the grass. "Somebody grab him!" she yelled, her voice trembling between rage and tears. But grabbing Bruno was easier said than done. He darted between chairs, tail wagging, dodging hands like a pro athlete. At one point, he leapt onto the gift table, scattering envelopes and neatly wrapped presents everywhere. My uncle's toaster box slid into the punch bowl with a dramatic splash. "Get him out of here!" I shouted at Mr. Johnson, who was red-faced and panting from chasing his dog. "I'm trying," he wheezed, lunging again. Bruno slipped right past him like he was greased. By this time, Bruno had officially entered his Zoom Mize mode. He did laps around the yard, barking joyfully, frosting dripping from his mouth, bouquet petals flying like confetti. A few kids joined in, chasing him, laughing hysterically. Someone even yelled, "This is better than the DJ." Meanwhile, the DJ actually stopped the music to commentate, like it was a sporting event. And Bruno is taking the lead down the aisle. Oh, he's going for the snacks table. No, wait, he's heading back for the bride. Folks, this is history in the making. My grandmother, bless her, tried to stand up with her cane and block Bruno's path. Instead, he zipped past her so fast that her wig almost flew off. Then, just when I thought things couldn't get worse, Bruno spotted the champagne tower. You know the one, glass after glass stacked in a perfect pyramid, ready for the big toast? He barreled straight toward it. "No," I yelled, diving forward in a desperate attempt to intercept. But Bruno was faster. He plowed into the table, sending the entire tower crashing down in a glorious explosion of broken glass and bubbly. Guests shrieked as champagne sprayed like a geyser across the dance floor. And there stood Bruno in the middle of it all, soaked, sticky, and looking immensely proud of himself. He barked happily, as though he had single-handedly made the wedding more exciting. Emma's mascara had started to run from tears, and she turned to me, her voice deadly calm. "David, either you fix this right now, or I'm walking away in this dress, married or not." And that's when I realized our marriage might not even make it past the reception if Bruno stayed one more second. I knew something had to be done. Fast. The longer Bruno stayed, the more my wedding turned into a viral blooper reel instead of the dream Emma had planned for months. I marched over to Mr. Johnson, who was still chasing his dog like a man half his age, but with zero results. "Mr. Johnson," I shouted, grabbing his arm to make him stop. "Get your dog out now." He wiped sweat from his forehead, wheezing. "I'm trying, son, but he's got a mind of his own." "No kidding," I muttered through gritted teeth. By now, guests were either horrified, hysterical with laughter, or recording on their phones. I swear I saw one of my cousins already uploading it to TikTok. Meanwhile, Bruno had found a new target, the three-tier wedding cake's lower half, which somehow survived his earlier attack. Emma screamed, "If that dog touches the cake again, I swear I'm leaving." That was my breaking point. I couldn't let this animal wreck the rest of the day and my marriage before it even started. So I did something I never thought I'd do in a tuxedo. I tackled Bruno. Yes, in front of all our family and friends, I lunged at a frosting-covered golden retriever and wrapped my arms around him like a desperate linebacker. He wriggled, barked, and tried to lick my face, but I held on for dear life. The crowd erupted into applause and laughter. Someone even yelled, "MVP." Covered in fur, slobber, and remnants of cake, I hauled Bruno to Mr. Johnson and practically shoved the dog into his arms. "Take him home now." Mr. Johnson looked guilty, nodding quickly. "I'm so sorry, David. So sorry, Emma. He gets excited around people." "Excited?" Emma snapped, glaring. "He destroyed our wedding." Mr. Johnson flinched but didn't argue. He carried Bruno off the property, the dog still wagging his tail like he'd just won Best Guest of the Year. When they were finally gone, I turned back to the mess. The cake was half-eaten, the champagne tower was gone, gifts were soggy, and Emma's bouquet looked like it had gone through a paper shredder. Guests were buzzing, laughing, whispering. I took Emma's hands gently. "Hey," I said softly, "I know this is a disaster, but it's still our day. We're still here. We're still married. Maybe we can salvage what's left." She looked at me with mascara-streaked cheeks, breathing heavily. Then, to my surprise, she let out a shaky laugh. "David, if we survive this, we can survive anything." The crowd clapped again, some even cheering. It felt like a small victory in the middle of chaos. But deep down, I knew the real challenge wasn't just salvaging the party. It was figuring out how to face my neighbors after this. Because something told me this wasn't the last I'd hear about Bruno. So here I am, a couple of weeks later, finally able to laugh about the disaster that was my wedding day. At least, laugh most of the time. Other times, I wake up in a cold sweat, remembering Bruno's frosting-covered paws on Emma's dress. The morning after, Emma and I sat in our hotel room, surrounded by half-ruined gifts and leftover champagne. She looked at me and said, "Well, David, at least we have a story. And oh boy, do we ever." Of course, the story didn't end there. The videos from the wedding blew up online. Within days, #DogsOfTheWedding was trending. Clips of me tackling Bruno in my tuxedo became meme material. One person even set it to dramatic football commentary and posted it with a caption, "The groom scores." My humiliation went viral. Emma wasn't exactly thrilled. She kept saying this was supposed to be my elegant, perfect day. Now it's a comedy special. But I reminded her, no one will ever forget our wedding. And honestly, it's true. Most people can't even recall what happened at the last wedding they attended. Ours? Legendary. As for Mr. Johnson, he came over the next week with an apology basket, cookies, wine, and a card that said, "Sorry Bruno ate the cake. Congrats on the wedding." Emma was still furious, but I couldn't help but chuckle. At least he acknowledged the cake. Now, Bruno is banned from all future neighborhood events, which is a shame because I think half our guests liked him more than me. Emma and I decided to redo our celebration in a smaller, private setting. No dogs, no surprises, just us and a few close family members. It wasn't the same as the grand wedding we planned, but honestly, it felt even better. Simple, stress-free, ours. Do I wish Bruno hadn't ruined the big day? Of course. But looking back, I realized something important. The wedding wasn't about the cake, or the flowers, or the champagne tower. It was about us, making it official, starting our life together, even if it started with chaos. And if we can laugh through a wedding day destroyed by a golden retriever, I think we're going to be just fine. So yeah, that's my story. Thanks for letting me vent. And to anyone planning a wedding, maybe invest in a lock, a fence, or I don't know, a professional dog wrangler. Trust me, it's worth it.